Today's guest is a really interesting man. Started life as a lawyer, had a very successful career, and then had a pivotal moment in his career where he decided to take a completely different direction and became a psychotherapist. But he's the author of this book, Radical Decency, which I would really highly recommend. Jeff Garson is his name, and you'll be listening to him very, very shortly. But really talk about what he means by radical decency, how that actually can impact on organizations, how he actually is not just a kind of a Pollyanna type of thinking and let's all be nice to each other and kumbaya. There's actually some very, very practical and real things that we actually need to look at, but also how we engage with the world and how we stop being on all of the time in terms of connected to our phones or to other devices, and how that plays out in terms of actually creating a world that is decent. It's a really profound conversation I found. I think Jeff is a really interesting man. So I really encourage you to sit back and listen to this podcast. And what we greatly appreciate if you can go and give us a review on iTunes and elsewhere, because that helps us to reach a wider audience. But in the meantime, sit back and enjoy very interesting Jeff Garson's. Jeff, I want to thank you indeed for being a guest on the podcast today. It's a great honor to have you here. I do have your book here, Radical Decency, which I have read. And if anybody could see it, you could see loads of places highlighted of things that I found really interesting and fascinating and come back to. And I do want to talk a little bit about that. But you're very welcome. And thank you for joining me.
Well, it's just my pleasure to be here. It's great. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, it'll be good. So maybe just to kind of give, I showed the book, The Radical Decency, maybe define radical decency and a little bit about your background and your journey to create the Decency Foundation, just to give context.
Sure. Okay. So this is a project that sort of culminates a lifetime of head scratching, which is I did good things when I was a younger man, but they seemed like puffs of smoke. We'd do something good, and it would kind of come and go, and the world just kept moving in what I thought was the wrong direction, and an indecent direction. And what I came to was at bottom, below all of the indecencies and injustices that exist in the world, is a set of values that are not bad values, but they're way overemphasized. And the values I call compete and win, dominate and control. And as you can, they have their place. They're so essential to a lot of what we do, but they're everywhere. They're in our marriages, they're in our schools, and they're way out of control. So what we need to do, if we're going to get at the heart of the matter, is reorient ourselves to a very different set of values, which I call decency. And break down to respect, understanding, empathy, acceptance, appreciation, fairness, and justice. And then the other key to it is because our world is so permeated with this other set of values, and because we're creatures of habit, and we're so influenced by the environments we live in, we have to practice those values at all times and in every context, with ourselves, others, and the world. So that we create a new habit of living, and we don't slip back into our habits, which are compete and win habits.
So what does the Decency Foundation do?
Well, the Decency Foundation is my activist arm. Excuse me. Well,
nice to know you're in. Nice to know you're in demand. Anyway,
I guess. The Decency Foundation is my activist arm. And, as I said in describing the philosophy, you need to do it in all areas of living. But if we're going to change the world, as opposed to ourselves, and they're both important, we have to find a strategic point of entry. I believe business is the strategic point of entry. Business, it runs the world. It funds everything else. It's become so important. And the good news is you can be decent you can take social responsibility very seriously as a businessman, I believe, and also make money. So our point of attack at the Decency Foundation is to work with businesses to tend to their social bottom line with the same seriousness of purpose and the same comprehensiveness with which they focus on their, profitability.
Martial side, yeah. Can I bring it back to your own? And if reading the book, if I understand it correctly, a kind of your kind of pivotal moment was, and just quoting from it, was that your bottom line was not decency, was thoroughly dependent on the accumulation of status and money. Just curious, I mean, why was that the kind of pivotal moment, and how did that make you feel?
I lived, I'm going to call it by a harsh term, I lived a lie for a long time. I grew up with this model that you could be a high-powered lawyer and a terrific community activist, and it all fit together very well, and it doesn't. I was putting in the long hours to be a successful lawyer and doing what I had to do in my cases. And that was where my greatest influence was in the world. It wasn't, the nights and weekends that I spent on my community projects. And this is not, I'm not proud of how it came to me, but that realization really hit home when, after 20 years of riding high, I hit a real business reverse in my career. And it caused me to really take stock of what I was doing and where I was going.
I'm just curious, because one of the things that occurred to me when reading that was that, in a sense, we're talking about decency, and I mean, and nobody's going to say, well, no, I shouldn't be decent, right? It's kind of motherhood and apple pie, isn't it? So it's kind of a given, but is it somewhat utopian? And I wonder, does it come across sometimes as that, if I talk about winning, that winning sounds like a dirty word, and I'm just wondering, is winning so wrong? Because do we not want to instill a winning mentality in our people and our youth?
Absolutely. I think winning is a fine thing. When it becomes the gruesome only thing, then we get into trouble. And that's what I speak against. But no, I mean, I want the Decency Foundation to thrive and do terrifically and make money, because if we make money, then we can expand our operations. But I always say, I don't want to, and in some ways, I'm more fearful of success than I am of failure, because when you're a success, boy, you're going to be seduced all over the place. And I want to keep our clarity of vision. I want to succeed on my terms, which means that I want to succeed with a business that is working out of a set of values that I deeply believe in.
And how do you see, I mean, when you're talking about the Decency Foundation and what you want to achieve with that, which I think is very valid and valuable, but how do you see organizations embracing it? And what would they be changing in their organizations to really be fulfilling that decency aspiration?
Yeah. Great question. So here's how I formulate things. I think that decency and profitability are compatible maybe 80 to 90% of the time. And I've actually read articles that use that number. And it seems intuitively right to me as somebody that's been around business for a long time. But there is that 10 to 20% zone where they aren't compatible. And that's where the rubber hits the road. You need to, in those situations, decisively make the decent choice. Now, when I say that, I even have a caveat to that, which is decency is a practical enterprise. You can't do everything at once. So the issue isn't I don't care about profitability, I'm just going to do it. You can't do that as a businessman. But what you can do is make your social responsibility bottom line something you pursue with focus, persistence, guts, and creativity. In other words, lean hard into it and don't settle for the easy way out. Don't settle for, hey, we had a couple of down quarters, let's cut back on that social engagement project that we've been working on. No, that's precisely the moment where those words come into play: focus, persistence, guts, and creativity. How do we keep doing it, notwithstanding near-term problems or maybe even some longer-term problems that may result from our commitment to social responsibility?
Because, you know, when you look at that, you define decency as the combination of the 7 values, which are respect, understanding, empathy, acceptance, appreciation, fairness, and justice, right?
Yep.
And to a very large extent, if you're looking from a business perspective, they would fit very neatly, in my view, into the values that an organization would embrace.
I think
which
so.
would lead to what you are looking to achieve.
Exactly. Yeah. Look, the devil's in the detail. It's in all those little choices that come up day by day, you know, from, you know, decisions about which initiatives to pursue and which not to pursue, to how you treat your employees. You know, it's everywhere. And ideally is addressed everywhere.
You quote in the book, and David Wallace Wells' book, The Uninhabitable Earth, where he catalogs, and it is actually some pretty terrifying predictions, by 2050, which is not that far away, right? We're not talking about a century time, you know, about the effect of climate change and other things. And I know climate change is a topic that's been very much, you know, in the news. I suppose my question is, how do you apply the Decency Foundation and Radical Decency to help stave off some of what David Wallace Wells is talking about?
Well, you know, I think, you know, the first thing is for a reorientation to happen with senior executives to say, you know, look, I'm a person first, and I have to live in this world along with everybody else, and so do my children. So I don't want to check that particular hat at the door when I walk into my office, and then just follow the numbers. And then, you know, the good that can be done where you are, it's there. You know, well, let me use our farmers as an example, which is, I think I told you before we started the interview.
Yeah, which is really good. I mean, it'd be interesting to share that with the audience.
Okay. So what we're doing at the Decency, you have to start someplace. So we're starting with business, and then within that, you have to start someplace, because there are a lot of businesses and a lot of sectors, and applying decency is going to vary from sector to sector. It's endlessly complicated. So we have focused, because my partner has special expertise in it, on agriculture. What John McConaughey, my partner, has done is he's a Wall Street guy turned farmer who's figured out that if you bring processing back to the farm, you can create profitability. With a more profitable enterprise, you can begin to tackle the issues of the environment, for example, which is precisely what John has done on his farm. So that he's using solar power to completely fund his farm. His animals are grass-fed, which tackles another aspect of this, all within the context of making money. And our pilot project is a dairy farm in New Jersey. And I'm telling you, when you walk out there and stand in the mud, and John takes his hand and sweeps and says, so we're going to move the grazing field over to this side of the farm, which means that the cows will not be walking through this stream every day. To me, it's like such an exciting moment. And we're addressing the environmental issue, but you have to address it one business at a time.
Yeah, but presumably what John is doing is scalable.
It's scalable, absolutely, without question.
And that is the critical. Can I switch to something else here that you talk about? And this is in the context of, you know, the culture of always being on, is very damaging. And to quote from your book, you say that we run the risk of making fight or flight, designed by nature to be an auxiliary system to deal with isolated moments of danger, our baseline neurological operating system. I mean, that's kind of living in a permanent state of anxiety, isn't it? Which is quite a terrifying thought. And it's also not only, those of us who are not kind of in the first flush of youth kind of at the stage, but when you look at the generation coming up who are, where there is a serious addiction to always being on, how do we address that? And how do we address that in the context of decency?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a wonderful example of how really deep the issue is that we're dealing with. One of my great gifts in life is that I've spent the last 20 years being a psychotherapist, dealing with that issue with one client after another on a case-by-case basis. And look, it's hard work. We are creatures of habit. So this instinct to immediately, check into how is this person a risk to me? Weaning yourself from that, I think, is a moment-by-moment proposition in life. And I know that it's been my journey with my wife. I mean, I think our coupled relationships are an excellent place to notice how ingrained fight or flight is in our culture, and also what the work looks like. Because, there's such a difference between my walking out in the morning and saying, well, why didn't you do the dishes last night? That's fight or flight, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I'm basically in attack mode. To just quietly noticing whatever is there and just saying, good morning, honey, here's your coffee.
It just struck me when I was reading that if and yes, I understand what you're saying, but I thought you put it very, very well, that it does mean that our fight or flight, which is really there just to kind of, warn us if the tiger is about to jump on top of us. But now that becomes my norm.
Yeah.
And if that becomes my norm, the quality of my thinking and the quality of my thought process, it's got to be seriously questioned, isn't it? Because everything is just done in the instant.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. When you're in fight or flight, you're in action mode. Either you're going to run like hell to get away from the danger, or you're going to attack. Now, the attack could be subtle. You don't have to be screaming at the person that you feel is a risk at the business meeting, but you're in attack mode. You're thinking, what am I going to say that's going to put me in a better position? And I'll tell you what's lost, and it's so sad, is it means we pay so little attention to our ability to listen and absorb what other people are saying and what they have to offer us. To me, listening in some ways is the antithesis of fight or flight. Yeah. And boy, do we need more of that.
Yeah, curious to talk about that, because I'm just preparing a talk on listening. So I do just doing quite a bit of research, and somebody was saying, well, what's the difference between hearing and listening, right? And and listening is it's attention. I'm actually paying attention to what is being said, and I think that I think our ability to listen, because I think it's also because of the instant availability and access to information and stuff coming through, it doesn't help our listening skills.
Not at all. Not at all. And listening is so much more complicated than speaking, because you're taking in another person, and it's a full-bodied experience, and really happens. Good listening happens over time. And the paradox is that if you listen well, people feel listened to. If people feel listened to, think how much more receptive they are to your ideas when the time comes for you to share.
Yeah, exactly.
So in some ways, it's the key to being an effective speaker.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. One of the things that I loved, which was, again, in the book, was your personal guide to living. And I quote from it: letting go of outcomes and attending to each moment's endless possibilities for offering and accepting love. I'm embracing my living and dying with compassion, curiosity, zest, and a deepening sense of acceptance and celebration. And I thought that was wonderful. I thought that this, letting go of the outcomes, I just thought that was a very profound way of describing it.
Yeah. It took me 5 years to perfect that run-on sentence, but I think about it all the time, and it really does sustain me. And I want to say that there's a preface to the contract. It's my contract with myself, that is not in the contract, but I remind myself of all the time, which is, I matter, I am important. Mm. And that unlocked the contract for me, because without that, I'd get into situations and say, I want to let go of outcomes, but God damn it, this person isn't listening to me, and it would squirrel the deal. And when I give myself that pep talk and say, look, Jeff, you matter, not to everybody, but you matter in the world, and just trust that, then it unlocks everything else. And you'll notice that part of it is, it's its own reward. Mm-hmm. If I let go of outcomes, I'm living with, curiosity and compassion and zest.
Is letting go of outcomes, does that mean that goal setting is irrelevant?
Absolutely not. No, set goals. Be very clever about moving toward them in a decent way. And then what happens, happens. And then of course you move on to the next goal. I mean, we're always recalibrating our goals, and I think it's
I think it's very powerful to actually remind ourselves to trust the process, because I think in so many ways we lose sight of the process, or we get frustrated with the process, or we lose faith in it. And suddenly then we not only do we abandon the goal, but abandon the process, but we very often abandon the goal, which is really quite sad. Mm-hmm. One of the 3 practice pointers to successful radical decency practice is make wisdom stretching a way of life. Uh-huh. Can you elaborate on that? Because I really liked that.
Look, my mantra is be decent to yourself. By the way, that's very important. There's nothing Pollyannish about this. Mm-hmm. Decency to self, others, in the world. And by the way, a lot of my clients, I have to shore up decency to self, because the easy way out is, I'm just going to take care of everybody and I'll be fine, But decency to self, others, in the world, at all times, in every context, and without exception. That is really hard. In fact, my supposition is nobody's radically decent. Okay. But to be a practitioner of what I believe in, you want to approach each moment doing justice to that challenge. And that's wisdom stretching, pure and simple, because we live in an imperfect world and we're imperfect beings. So how do I do all that right now? And instead of just going one way or the other, sitting in the complexity, I think is the core of the approach to living, and wisdom stretching encapsulates it for me. And by the way, I think if you get in the habit of doing that, it's a joyful way to live.
Mm-hmm. It also demands that you stay curious, doesn't it?
Yeah, curiosity is absolutely at the core of this, which I contrast with judgment, which is, I think, the sort of the gold standard of compete and win, dominate and control. What is it? Lead, follower, get out of the way. That's pretty judgmental,
Absolutely. So. Jeff, this has been great. I'm sorry, I've taken up more of your time than I said I would, but it's just been great. I said I really enjoyed the book. I would highly recommend Radical Decency to anyone to actually go out and get it. But before you tell us where we can get it, how people can get in touch with you, 2 questions I ask everybody, every guest: a book other than your own that's had an impact upon you. What's the book and what was the impact?
Oh boy, I mean,
pick one. Which one?
You gave me fair warning. Just one? I have to pick just one?
Well, you can pick 2.
Okay. Well, one book which I think is stunning in terms of describing where we are and these scary shifts that have happened on a macro level is Reina Fruolhar's Maker and Takers, which was written about 5 years ago. It's brilliant and just terrific analysis. I guess maybe I should stop there.
Okay, all right. That's a new one to me. I haven't read it. So it gets added to the list.
It's quite extraordinary.
Okay. And daily rituals, do you have them? If you do, what are they and what do they do for you?
Yeah, my life is full of rituals. I'm a very routinized kind of a guy. So the two that I can mention are, number one, I've been writing for about a dozen years now. Every morning I get up about an hour and a half before my wife. I sit at the couch, I pull out my computer and I write, and I'm just joyful. I just love it. And then 3 or 4 times a week, I get over to the gym.
All right. Okay.
And
the daily writing, is that part of writing the book, or is that just journaling?
It's a little bit of everything.
Right.
And, for years it was writing my Radical Decency reflections, which are 2,000 word essays that I put out weekly. It was the book for 5 years. It's my blog now. I'm not a journaler, but there's so much I want to write about, and I've become so joyful as a writer. I discovered a vocation rather late in life, and
that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Jeff, this has been absolutely super. I really enjoyed it. I wish you success with the book. I've no doubt that you will have great success with it. Where can people buy the book, and where can they get in touch with you?
Well, it's easy to buy on Amazon. So go there, Radical Decency, or put my name in, Jeff Garson. JeffGarson.com is my author's page, which I was told I needed, so I have it. And it describes the philosophy. You can buy the book there. And by the way, if you buy it there, well, all the proceeds of the book go to the foundation in any case. Right. So I do want to say that. And the other thing about jeffgarson.com is there's a place to messenger us. So I love to talk about Radical Decency. And if you have a question or an idea or a criticism, please send me a note, and I can promise a response.
Jeff, thank you so much for being a guest. It's been an honor to have you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've loved the conversation. Thank you.
Well, me too. I just, thank you for reading the book, and thank you for being so smart and perceptive in your questions. It really stretches and grows me.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. It was an honor to have you here. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, thank you.